Oh, what is going on, guys? It is JS here, back with another video, and today's video we're going to be doing the chapter summary for Step Closer. I finally read this chapter and I finally will be doing a summary because it's been a while, like literally almost a year since this book came out, and I've not even done a single summary for this yet. So that's what I'm going to be doing in today's video, and also too this way so I can catch up with the new books that are coming out later this year, like The Puppet Carver, Gumdrop Angel, so on and so forth, like the new upcoming books. So I need to catch up, and yeah, that's basically what I'm going to be doing today. So like I said, we are going to be doing the chapter Step Closer. Oh geez, I need to go to the actual page, but yeah, we're gonna go through Step Closer. If I had to rate this chapter, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It was good, it's just like the ending part left me confused. I mean, not confused, but I'm just like, huh? I kind of get it, but you guys will see later on whenever I do get to it. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So the opening of this chapter literally is just action right away. Hold on, let me read it to you guys. Foxy's yellow eyes glowed in the dark of the room. His jaw hung open, flashing sharp teeth. Foxy lifted his hook and slashed a sharp tip in front of Pete's face. The hook whistling by his nose, Pete rolled off the bed, his body shaking, his stomach pitched as he lay helpless on the floor, and Foxy pivoted, looming over him. The shifting of gears filled the room as Foxy swung up with his hook. You can be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. No, Pete breathed. When Foxy slammed his hook down on Pete's eye, an audible pop sounded. Blood poured from his eye socket as Pete screamed, and then, literally right after that, it cuts to like the past part. So the main characters I just want to say first and foremost is Pete and Chuck. Pete is, I believe, the main character in this, but Chuck is like the secondary character. But Pete is like the main protagonist in this chapter. So they're at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Chuck is there because of his friends, but then also Pete has to be there because he has to look after his brother. So sometimes Pete doesn't not sometimes, but whenever like after their parents got divorced, he always didn't like spending time with his brother, and it led him to this thing where he's just like, he didn't want to hang out with him as much. So literally what his mom tells him all the time is like, you're the man of the house, you need to take care of your brother and be like the responsible one here because you're, the only. So he's watching the kids, play around at the restaurant, and then he hears some kids like asking, hey, where's Foxy the pirate? And then the guy says, oh, Foxy's on vacation in the moment, he'll be back soon, which you guys will see. You'll see why later. So Pete sees this girl called Maria Rodriguez who is in their high school class, and and then Pete asks, it's like, hey, what are you doing here? She's like, oh, I have to look over like my little sister because it's her birthday party. And then Pete's like, yeah, I'm here because of my brother. And she's like, oh, okay. Then they go on to the topic about, Pete playing football, and he quit the team because he wasn't doing as much practice, but most of it was because it was the divorce between him and his dad and his mom. So he has this little conversation in his head like, it's all Chuck's fault, like why does he have to be like a brat and all that. And it does say that nothing really matters to Pete anymore, like his brother, his dad has left, and his mom is like in her own little world. So I guess Pete is like, just has so many emotions over like so many things, like taking care of his brother, as well as, dealing with his parents' divorce. So after, Pete has this little conversation in his head, he goes over to Chuck and he's like, okay, you know what? We're gonna go on a little adventure. And then, Pete grabs Chuck's arm, like, really, really squeezing it, and they go to the maintenance room, which if you guys, I believe I said earlier, Foxy was in that maintenance room, and you'll see why. So they continue walking to the maintenance area to meet Foxy the pirate, and actually did say that they're gonna go through the entrance in the maintenance room to meet Foxy. and Pete's still, you know, he's still picking on Chuck, and when they get there, this is something that really caught my attention. Listen to this. He flashed the light back down on the floor. He stopped to look at what dark melted candles and strange black markings. What is that? Are those symbols? Chuck wanted to know. Sounds like something like a ritual, which is definitely interesting, which I think explains why maybe this happened in the chapter. So once they get there, they have another fight, and Chuck is, you know, completely done with it. He doesn't even want to deal with it anymore. So they start fighting. They fight, and then eventually Chuck runs off. But then eventually they hit the button to, you know, start up Foxy, and Chuck gets away, and Pete's the only one that's left, and this is what happened. Choppy music sounded through the air as the curtains opened fully. Pete stood frozen in front of a fractured Foxy animatronic that was glaring down at him. The yellow eye glowed under red brows, and an eye patch flipped over his eye. A jaw with sharp, pointy teeth hung loosely as the big fox began to sing a disjointed song about becoming a pirate. One arm had a hook for a hand, and the other hand was stripped of fur, showing its robotic skeleton. Strange sounds of whirling gears screeched and seemed to echo in the quiet of the room. The robot's chest appeared ripped open, exposing more of its mechanical body. Foxy moved slowly, eerily. Even though Pete knew he was a robot, his deteriorated body looked like to be half eaten away, but who knew what? A shiver skidded down Pete's spine. He swallowed his gum. He knew he couldn't move his gaze away from Foxy's yellow eyes as he sang, "Didn't know why, just a dumb old robot. You can't be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg, first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. Yarg." And after that, he just kept saying the same old, you know, lyric over and over and over again, which I feel like because of those markings from the floor and, you know, Foxy saying that, it really feels like they are doing like some sort of ritual, which is so interesting. So Pete leaves, and then he goes back to meet with his brother, and then eventually, you know, a couple hours later, they get back home, and they're talking about, you know, how their day was. It's like, oh, it was good, I guess. Then Chuck was gonna bring up, you know, the fact that Pete was bullying him, but he didn't want, you know, Pete to bully him even more. But then the mom goes to talk about, it's like, and then she goes out and she's like, I have something new that'll, you know, help family members and also help change the world, and it is organ donation. This key factor, organ donors, like, keep this in mind for like later in the video, because this is key when it ever comes to the end of the chapter. So Pete is not happy about the whole point of becoming a organ donor, because, you know, he thinks that whenever like people are like still alive, he thinks that they're gonna become like organ donors whenever they're alive. But then the mom later like explains, it's like, okay, it's only whenever your body's not functioning or something like that. So after they do a little bit of arguing, the mom shows Pete, you know, the paper that it comes with to kind of give like an explanation. And then whenever Pete reads the list of the organ donations, he sees eyeballs, but then it got him reminded of you could be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm, which he flashed back to Foxy, and does say he flashed back to Foxy, and he imagined Foxy with the hook taking out Pete's eye, which is very interesting. So after that, you know, after like he has a little flashback, he's like, okay, I'm just gonna go to bed. And that's what happens. So the next morning, Chuck is wanting to go to the bathroom so, you know, they can get ready for school. But Pete is not feeling well because he had a dream. But yeah, it said he has a crazy dream last night, which, you know, it was all full of blood. Now, if you remember from like that first part that I told you about, like that one sequence where there was like when Foxy hooked his eye, I feel like it's because of that, and you'll see why in a second. So a couple hours later, Pete heads to class, and they're doing a biology experiment of dissecting frogs. So one of the classmates, which they call it the leather jacket guy, he pokes at the frog's eye, which got him reminding, you know, of whenever Foxy was talking about the eye, and she's like, okay, I need a break. And then he's like, okay, I'll stop messing, you know, around. He continues to, you know, work on the dissection, and then this was interesting. Let me read it to you. It went downhill from there. Pete took a quick, long stride on his foot and laid it on his pack strap instead of landing securely on the floor. That was when he slipped, losing his footing. Falling backward, he felt his toe connect with leather jacket guy in a brutal way. The kid yelped, and Mr. Watson shouted something in reply. Pete landed on his back. His breath knocked out of him. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes, he spotted the kid's scalpel in the air. The small knife must have flown up on impact, but then, in disbelief, Pete saw the scalpel lose gravity and fall towards his face, at the point of the tiny blade coming straight for his eye. Adrenaline spurted through his body, with the quick reflexes that came from the years of playing football. Pete swatted the tool away like a deadly insect just as the blade was about to blind him. The scalpel didn't hit the stand of the workstation and fell to the floor. So, remember when I was talking about, you know, the whole thing, you know, losing an eye and losing an arm? He almost lost his eye right there, which more of that will happen, but you guys will see that eventually. So after that, Pete goes to the office. He goes to the office, to the nurse's office, so that way, you know, he can get all checked out and make sure everything's fine. He feels better, he gets a little ice pack to his head, and then he heads home. And then his mom texts him and it's like, hey Pete, after school, can you swing by the butcher shop and pick up my order of pork chops? And he was like, yeah, I could do that for you. So he goes to the butcher shop, and you know, he's looking around, you know, trying to find, you know, where the worker is. He moves around the back, again, you know, just look for the owner, but he was looking around, and it said a new wave of dizziness washed over him. He set his hand out for balance on a butcher table, felt the watery liquid on his fingertips, and broke out in a cold sweat. Wham! A huge meat cleaver slammed down into the wood, barely missing his wrist. Pete shot backward, protecting his hand against his chest, knocking into the display case with his pack. He gazed at the meat cleaver embedded in the wood. The handle vibrated in the air as if the force had been incredibly strong. His gaze whipped up toward the hanging tools. Again, another incident. See where this is going, and it almost went to his hand, so keep in mind, if you want to be a pirate, you have to lose an eye and an arm. So the owner finds him and it's like, hey, what are you doing back here? And he's like, oh, nothing. But do you have my, I have an order. And he's like, oh yeah, I do. So he gets his order and then he heads back home. Eventually he finds Chuck, and you know, they argue, you know, as usual. And then they talk about, you know, the organ donors. So he basically, Chuck explains, it's like, it's not a big deal anyway. You're dead, you know, whenever, you know, people take their organs. And, you know, Chuck gets deep into, you know, the whole process of it, which I will not say on this video. But Pete ends up leaving anyway because he feels too disgusted by, you know, especially what happened at the biology lab and also at the meat place. So the next day, Pete is going to school again, and he goes through a construction site, and, you know, he wants to be careful so, you know, nothing will happen to him. But then eventually something did happen, and someone said, hey kid, watch out. And this is what happened. Pete spotted something moving fast in his peripheral vision. His head turned in time to see a circular buzzsaw flying in his direction, reminding him of a fly frisbee with sharp teeth. His jaw went slack, his adrenaline spiked. He dove backward as a round blade flew through the air toward him. He held up his hand in defense, like maybe he could catch it, then he realized that was the worst thing to do, and he tried to pull his hand out of the path of the flying blade. He thought he was home free when he felt a slice into his flesh above his wrist, followed by a sharp stinging. He crashed to the ground, his drink pouring over him. Air gushed out of his lungs. His eyes were wide as he lifted his arm, watching in shock as blood poured down his skin. So basically, he had another incident about, you know, this time a buzzsaw, or I think it was a buzzsaw, a buzzsaw going towards his wrist. So they call 911 and, you know, they make sure he's okay. So then a couple hours later, his mom was, you know, talking to him, you know, all worried. And then his dad comes to, you know, to see if, you know, everything is okay. But yeah, Pete's dad offers him to go fishing, but Pete doesn't want to, you know, considering that he wants to, you know, stay safe. So that way no more accidents would happen. So his dad was like, it's not too bad, I wouldn't worry about it. So they go out and they go fishing. So whenever Pete and his dad is at the boat, you know, they're having a lot of conversations, like one about, you know, Pete having to be a good brother, you know, the whole separation with Pete's mom and his dad, and then, you know, you know, talking about like the whole injury thing. And then another incident happened with this. Something tugged his face forward. Ah, Pete! He dropped his pole and his hands flew to his face and find a fishing hook struck into his skin. The hook was attached to the fishing leg, trying to pull his skin off. He leaned forward, screaming. Shock and pain flooded through him. His heart was pounding so fast that he thought he might explode out of his chest. The line was so tight. Pete stepped forward again to try to ease the pressure. There was only dark water below him and he couldn't stop. I'm going head first into the lake, he thought. He felt his dad's arm wrap around him and keep from falling. Hold still, his dad whipped out a small hunting knife and cut the line. The pressure instantly released. Peter hunched over in severe pain. Blood dripped from the water. His dad held him. It's okay, buddy, I got you. He pulled him back away from the edge of the pier. I'm sorry, someone called out. Is he okay? The freaking wind blew my cast toward you guys. I can't believe it. Pete, look at me. Come, let's see the damage. And then the hook, like, I believe was in this area, maybe, but it was like close. It was pretty much close to the eye. So it's another incident, you know, dealing with the eye. So then eventually Pete comes home and then, you know, his mother sees his injury and she's like, wait, what, twice in one day? Are you kidding me? After that, Pete and Chuck, you know, has a conversation, and then Chuck is like, something weird, right, though? First you were sick, and Mom filled me about the weird accident with the construction site, and now this fishing thing? Chuck had been thinking about the weird stuff he piled up from his brother's life. It all in the makings of a real good puzzle. This all started when you tried to scare me at Freddy Fazbear's, he pointed out. So Chuck thinks that because, you know, everything that happened, it all has to link with, you know, Freddy Fazbear's, which is definitely interesting. And then, you know, he told Chuck about, you know, the whole incident in biology class where the scalpel almost, you know, went to his eye. So Pete also doesn't believe that Chuck thinks that this whole thing is some sort of curse, which is like, that's stupid. Like, why would you ever think that? So eventually Pete comes in to, you know, go to Chuck, and they're like, you know what, it's just stupid for us to fight. Let's go ahead, you know, and, you know, be brothers and, you know, play this game together. So they play it, and the mom, it's like, hey, you want some popcorn? And they're like, yeah, we can use the popcorn. So this truly shows that they're actually having some, you know, brother, you know, time together, which is very, very cool. And then Chuck walks over, you know, to Pete. He's showing, you know, what he, you know, drew. And this is what, and there are 5 boxes that, this is what it described. There are 5 boxes arranged in a circle, with arrow pointings between them. On the top of the chart, Foxy the Pirate, and the following boxes read Bioclass, Butcher Shop, Construction Site, and Lake. So Pete's wondering, it's like, hey, what does this all mean? And then Chuck is like, well, basically what this means is everything that's happened possibly is linked to, you know, Foxy. And he even has like this little thing written down, and this is what it says right here. Foxy the Pirate song, lose eye, lose arm. Bioclass, nearly lost eye. Butcher shop, nearly lost arm. Construction site, nearly lost arm. Lake, nearly lost eye. So this is literally linking up to the Foxy song. It's like, if you want to be a pirate, first you have to lose an eye, then an arm. Which, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And he's like, oh, it's just a robot. Like, why do you think this is some sort of curse? And then, you know, they fight about it, and basically their truce is over with. Like, the time that they enjoyed, you know, hanging out with each other, they made a truce for that, but then eventually whenever Chuck was trying to explain the whole Pete situation, like, you know, with, you know, Pete having this curse, their truce is broken. So then Pete is sleeping, and this, I'm gonna have to read this to you guys. This is just absolutely epic right here. All right. Pete tossed and turned in bed. Since his mind was wide awake, his pajamas felt too warm. His blankets were heavy. His bedroom was dark except for the moonlight that filtered through the curtain on his window. As he stared at the curtain, he thought he saw something dark flash behind the fabric. Pete got to his feet and walked to the window, pushing the curtain aside. The front yard was quiet. A car was parked at the curb. A row of trees lined the street. Nothing out of the ordinary. He rolled his shoulders to release his tension, then went back to bed. He hit his pillow a couple of times to get comfortable. Then he stared at the ceiling at some time more. No use, he couldn't fall asleep. A moment passed as he found his eyes lured back to the window. Don't look up, don't look up. But he couldn't help himself. Something felt strange. He was alone in his room, but he felt like he was being watched, which was completely stupid. Sighing, he stood and walked back to the window, again pushing the curtain aside. He was about to step away when he caught a movement behind the trees. Was someone there? Pete's pulse raced. He rubbed his eyes, blinked, and searched for more movement, but nothing was there. His mind was messing with him. He was freaking paranoid. He took a breath and released it. It was probably just the wind blowing the branches. He scrubbed his hands down his face and lay back down in bed. The wind howled and somehow had calmed him a little. Then the backyard gate creaked. The gate must have come unlatched in the wind, right? Just to be certain, Pete listened carefully. An owl hooted. A door creaked. A second later, he jerked upright, his heart pounding. Was that creaking inside the house? He crept to his bedroom door and slowly opened it. He searched the empty hallway. No one was lurking around. He was staring to really freak himself out. Mom and Chuck were asleep. No one else was in the house. Just go to sleep, he told himself. He stomped to bed, threw himself down, and squeezed his eyes shut. Then, he thought he heard a footstep. Just go to sleep. The floor creaked outside his door. A chill crept down his spine. No one is here. No one else is here. He told himself it was just his imagination, but the air seemed to shift around him. The hairs on his arm stood up, and he couldn't deny his unease anymore. When he opened his eyes, Foxy stood above him. Terror sucked the air from Pete's lungs. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Foxy's yellow eyes glowed in the darkness of the room. His jaw hung open, flashing sharp teeth. Foxy lifted his hook and slashed his sharp tip in front of Pete's face, the metal whizzing by his nose. Pete shoved himself off the bed, his body shaking, but he couldn't get off the floor. Foxy pivoted, looming over him. The shifting of gears filled the room as Foxy swung up with his hook. You could be a pirate, but first you'll have to lose an eye and an arm. No, Pete breathed. Foxy slammed his hook into Pete's eye, and there was an audible pop. Blood poured from his eye socket as Pete screamed. Foxy's mechanical foot slammed onto his right arm, crushing muscle and grinding against bone. Pete convulsed in agony. He tried to push Foxy off of him. Too heavy, too strong. Pete's heart pounded. Tears and blood ran down his face. Foxy hacked down, his hook tearing into Pete's hand, splintering bone and tearing muscle until it ripped off completely. Foxy lifted his hook, and watched Pete's hand dangle, blood spilling down. Pete screamed. He woke up screaming into his pillow. So, it was all a dream after all. That section, this section right here literally is the beginning chapter of, like, the beginning part of this chapter, which was so interesting. You know, he woke up after that dream and it's just like, it's just a nightmare, but at the same time, it felt really real. So the next day, Pete goes to school, and then they're having this homecoming pirate theme, which probably, oh gosh, this is getting interesting. So he's still thinking at school. It's just like, do I really have to, you know, go and face Foxy? Which Chuck did say it was, I believe a couple pages ago, he did say, and you know, in order to be, you know, this person that's, you know, coming after you, you have to face him, you know, yourself and get this curse over with, which apparently that's what Pete and Chuck believes that, you know, Pete should do. So Pete is now at the carnival and he sees Maria, and then they go to like this Chinese finger trap thing, which only you just use your hand, you know, and then you want to grab it, you just, you know, get like a random prize. So he tries that, but it's stuck on him. And every time, like, you know, Pete or Maria, they try to get it off of him, it's squeezing tighter and tighter and tighter, which it's getting his mind thinking, it's like, oh gosh, I'm gonna be losing my hand in a bit. Like, oh gosh. So they try their best, you know, to get the trap off of him, but then they finally free his hand, and Pete's skin, you know, after that was like completely, it says, completely purple and felt completely numb. So Pete is mad at Maria. It's like, why? Like, you shouldn't have done that to me. Like, why did you do that in the first place? And, you know, he runs off to this place, you know, with mirrors. So think of, whenever I read that, it reminded me of that one scene in It Chapter 2 where Bill goes into the mirror, like that mirror haunted area. If you guys like remember this right here, it kind of reminded me of that, not gonna lie. So he's like, okay, I have to get out of here fast. And then he sees the face of a pirate, Fox. And he's like, okay, I have to get out of here. So he runs away from the area. He's trying to find a way out. So he gets out of the way, and apparently it wasn't a fox with the pirate hat. It was actually a clown. And so he continued running, and then a dart came, and then he got his cheek. And like I said, still close to the eyeball. And then he thinks he's hearing a parrot, you know, shriek, lose an arm. So basically he's going mental at this point. He's going very mental. And he's like, you're not gonna win, Foxy, you're not gonna win. So the teacher comes out, it's like, hey, are you okay? You know, you're bleeding. And he's like, no, I'm not okay. Someone's after me. And it's like, you don't understand. Like, I have to face him. I have to go, you know, fight him. I have to, you know, end this right now. So he runs away from the teacher. He's in the hallway, and then he gives Chuck a call. It's like, hey, dude, you were right all along. It has been Foxy. I'm going over there right now to face him. But then, oh, dude, this is when, in a blind panic, Pete rushed off the sidewalk and into the street. He sensed something speeded toward him, and he turned. That's when a truck smashed into him with extreme force. His body went flying, his limbs twisting, and one moment felt like forever. Then he crashed, his body slamming on the ground. He felt a crack, then a shatter. The force scalded his skin against the road as he rolled and rolled, leaving a path of blood behind him. Pain was everywhere. Then everything went dark. I wish I could say that's the end of the chapter, but no, that's not it yet. So, oh boy, dude. And then Chuck, you know, on Chuck's perspective, he gets the call from Pete, you know, that same call, and then he's going to, you know, Freddy Fazbear's. He gets there and he's like, okay, Chuck, Pete, where are you, bro? And then he gets a call from his dad, and he's like, Pete, are you there? And he's like, no, it's your dad. And then he was like, are you at school? And he's like, no, I'm at Freddy Fazbear's. He's like, something's happened and there's been an accident. So he goes over to where Pete is, and they learn that Pete died by that truck, which that melted my heart, dude. That absolutely melted my heart. You know, after seeing, like, you know, Chuck's reaction, his mom's reaction, it was just heartbreaking. And then this is what said. Pete was laying on the gurney. His eyes were closed, and he looked incredibly pale. The scratches from the fishing accident stood out like angry red lines on his face, and he had fresh scrapes etched on his forehead. Chuck waited for his eyes to open, waited for him to move, blink, anything. He's gone, Chuck, Dad said through tears. Oh my gosh, that's just, oh my gosh. Then this point, I'm gonna read the rest of this to you guys. Alright, so this part right here is interesting. Pete wakes up, but he's still dead at this point, but apparently he can still look where everything is. And then he's at like a hospital. So Pete's body is at a hospital where, you know, I guess, like, you know, for donors and stuff, like, especially for, you know, since, you know, Pete is dead, he's like, okay, I feel weird, and, you know, and the doctors are talking over him. It's like, oh my gosh, poor kid, he was so young, and he's like, guys, I can't move, please get me out of this. and he's like, and then the doctors get like this urgent case. It's like, oh, there's someone like in need of an eye in one of the hands, and it's just like, we're gonna transport that because, you know, Pete is, you know, his organs are healthy, you know, still since his, and because of this, his mom, you know, since his mom made Pete and Chuck an organ donor, this is what's happening right here. They're basically donating his hand and eyeball to the new to the donor recipe. So then he hears the words whenever the blade is you know, coming over Pete, and it hears, "You could be a pirate, but first you have to lose an eye and an arm." And then Pete watched in helpless horror as the man leaned down to take his eyes. So it actually kind of did happen a way that he would lose his eye in his hand, which was interesting. So 4 weeks later, after Pete's death, everyone, you know, still knows that Chuck lost his brother, and instead, so Chuck doesn't want to meet up with his friends, but he goes to Freddy Fazbear's, and then he keeps on playing the messages like, "Chuck, you were right, it's been Foxy all along, I'm gonna face him." So Chuck goes over to, you know, Freddy Fazbear's, and this is what it reads. He locked his bike on the bike rack in front of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. When he stepped through the doors, the familiar scent of pepperoni wafted over him. The pings and musical sounds vibrated around him. He walked through the arcade and saw a group of kids huddled around a game. That used to be him. He always loved this place until that fateful day when Pete dragged him down the corridor to the maintenance room and everything had changed. He walked through the play area and over to the birthday tables and watched a couple of families sitting right in front of the stage. Everyone looked so happy. The little kids were eating pizza, enthralled by the show of the animatronics. Some were singing with their mouths full. The kids clapped and cheered after the song was finished. Chuck walked toward the corridor that led to the maintenance room. He looked over his shoulder to see if anyone was watching. Then he slipped through. He walked slowly down the darkened hallway past the old posters until he reached the door. He reached out for the handle and his hand shook. He took a breath and pulled the heavy door open, stepping into darkness. The door slammed at his back, the sound echoing in his ears. He pulled out his inhaler as his breath thinned and took a puff. Then he shoved his inhaler into his pocket and pulled out his phone light. He went straight to the small stage and straight to the open control box. No more wasting time. A shiver crawled down his back, but he ignored it. If he hesitated, he knew he wouldn't do it if he had been replaying this moment over and over in his head. He had to do it. He had to find out what happened to Pete. "This is for you, Pete," he said into the dark room. "I will face the villain and beat the game." He braced himself and slammed down the start button. He waited for the curtain to pull back, for Foxy to begin to sing, but nothing happened. All Chuck heard was complete silence. And that is the end of the chapter. It's like, now that I'm thinking about it, I really do, like, man, I think the reason why I put it like a 9 out of 10, because I'm still confused if that circle, you know, with the candles was like a ritual to, you know, have people like go mad and, you know, hallucinate that Foxy's there, because that's what happened in 1:35 a.m. The main character, Delilah, I think that was her name, she kept imagining Ella in her brain, which was that was definitely interesting indeed. So it's like another hallucinogenic type of thing. But man, dude, that ending was so sad. Oh man, whenever Pete, oh gosh, that was probably one of the saddest deaths I've ever, you know, read in a book, for Fazbear Fright. But on and all, I thought it was cool. So the next chapter is Dance With Me. I heard this chapter is pretty short and I cannot wait to read it. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you guys did, make sure to hit the thumbs up and make sure to subscribe for more videos. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.